Feulner is founder of the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. He is also part of the Trump transition team. He joins us from Hong Kong, and Richard Jeremy is here still with us. Ed, great to have you on the show today. Being mindful here that, yes, you are on the opposite side of the political spectrum, but I'm curious to get your take about the developments over the weekend with the DNC. Former Labor Secretary Tom Perez winning over Congressman Keith Ellison. I mean, this was a very divisive vote. If you look at the breakdown here, 218 out of 435 votes. What does that tell you about just how divided the Democratic Party is right now, even in the face of what could be a very unifying Donald Trump administration?
Yeah, one would think that Mr. Trump would pull them all together. When I was talking during the course of the transition, when Perez first came out and announced that he was running for it, I asked a simple question of one of my attorneys in Washington. I said, if he's actually sitting there collecting a federal paycheck, how can he be running for a party position? Well, that argument never got very far, but anyway, he is now the Democrat chairman. He is going to, I suspect, pull together the party as best he can, and it'll be like 90% in opposition to everything Trump wants. Even Chuck Schumer now, who at one point said that he wanted to find areas where he could work with President Trump, is now pretty well eliminated that. He voted against Elaine Chao for Secretary of Transportation, which I thought was a little bit bizarre because, of course, Elaine Chao is Mrs. Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer have to sit in meetings 4 or 5 days a week, and I think it would be a little hard for Schumer to look McConnell in the eye and say, well, I had to vote against your wife. Don't take it personally, though. So it's a really tense time right now for politics, and the reason it's tense, I think, is because Donald Trump is a disruptor. He came in with a whole new agenda, and by gosh, he's putting it in place one step at a time.
We are expecting to hear from Donald Trump addressing both houses of Congress this week. Are you expecting to get a bit more clarity, especially on the issue of tax reform?
I hope so. I hope it will be the primary plank, really, of his State of the Union message on Wednesday evening. It is a very important speech for the whole country, and I hope he will remember that what the basics were that actually got him elected, and the number one thing was how do we get the economy back on track. I've been listening, of course, for the last few minutes about the continuing great upward movement in the U.S. market, particularly. I had the honor of being down at closing bell on the New York Stock Exchange a couple of weeks ago, and it really is exciting up there to actually be there day after day and see these great upturns. And this is all in anticipation of what Mr. Trump is going to do. Yes, he's already done some repeals of some regulations. He said he will repeal more. But the big things, the tax policy that we're all waiting for, that's the one that's going to get everybody's attention and that we're going to have to get really focused on and concentrated on.
Yeah, we did hear from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin in that interview with CNBC last week, saying that he expects to see a very significant tax reform passed before the August recess. Is that a realistic timeline?
I think it very much is realistic. One of the problems, I'm afraid, that some of my friends outside of Washington don't understand is every action in Washington has real consequences. For example, the slow walking of conservative nominees, Republican nominees for cabinet jobs. That means, well, we still don't even have Wilbur Ross, who is fairly non-controversial. We don't have Ben Carson confirmed for the cabinet. And until you get the cabinet confirmed, you don't have the deputy secretaries confirmed. And if you don't have the deputy secretaries, you don't have the undersecretaries, on down the line. When I left the transition just a couple days before the inauguration, our last day really, I sent a memo into the system and I said our objective ought to be to have 300 confirmed people in place by March 1st. Well, now it looks like we're going to have about 62 or 63 people. So you can't really run government when you're depending on political appointees from the Obama administration, all of whom have a vested interest in the status quo, and all of whom are going to be undercutting Mnuchin there, or Tillerson at State, or Mattis even in the Pentagon.
So, Ed, just on this tax reform issue again, if you don't get a border adjustment tax through, it seems pretty hard to make the numbers add up. Do you think Congress would go for a reform which involves a big increase in the U.S. deficit over the next few years, or do you think there's a faction which will be blocking that sort of reform?
I really think that a BAT is basically a non-starter in Washington. And I'll tell you why. Donald Trump appealed to real America, and the notion that somehow a tax, no matter how you define it or describe it, a tax that is going to increase the cost of the basic items that individuals want to buy for themselves, their families, back home, just because it crosses the border and because in effect it gets a consumption tax put on it, that's not going to fly. There have to be better ways to do it, and I know that Kevin Brady and others are looking at trying to figure out what the pieces are. Kevin Brady of the Ways and Means Committee, but I know Kevin has been rather enthusiastic about the border adjusted tax, but boy, I surely don't see that as the centerpiece of what's going to be happening on tax reform. I think Ryan can figure it out. He has been in the Ways and Means seat. He knows what it's about, and there are some very bright people up there working on it, but it's not going to include a border adjusted tax, in my opinion, as a centerpiece.
Okay, we'll have to leave it on that note. Ed, great to get your insights this morning. Ed Feulner joining us from the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation.